Most people believe they are weak because they lack motivation, discipline, or confidence. The belief itself is the trap. Weakness is rarely a personal failure. It is almost always the result of long-term conditioning that rewards submission, discourages independence, and reframes self-control as something dangerous, obsessive, or unhealthy. When weakness appears consistently across entire populations, it stops being an accident and starts being a system. Fear is the first mechanism used to install that system. Not fear of real danger, but fear of social consequences. Fear of embarrassment, fear of exclusion, fear of being misunderstood. These fears are subtle because they feel internal. They feel like instinct. But instinct protects survival. This fear protects conformity. From an early age, we are trained to associate standing out with risk. Speak too directly and you are labeled aggressive. Stay silent and you are judged suspicious. Question authority and you are difficult. Follow instructions and you are safe. Over time, safety replaces truth as the primary value. Once that happens, strength becomes suspicious and restraint becomes threatening. A person who fears disapproval will always hesitate before acting. That hesitation is where control enters. It doesn't require force. It doesn't require authority. It only requires doubt. Doubt slows action. Slowed action creates dependency. Dependency removes sovereignty. Stoicism never attempted to eliminate fear. It taught discrimination. There is fear that sharpens the mind, and fear that dulls it. Fear of hunger produces action. Fear of death clarifies priorities. Fear of discomfort produces avoidance. Fear of judgment paralyzes. Modern life is structured to amplify the paralyzing fears and suppress the clarifying ones. The illusion of choice reinforces this structure. People are told they are free because they can choose between endless options, and all lead to the same outcome. Different platforms, different lifestyles, different opinions, different identities. The system itself remains untouched. Choice without consequence is not freedom. It is distraction dressed as autonomy. Real choice is rare and uncomfortable. It demands sacrifice. It requires saying no. It forces trade-offs. Most people are never trained for this, so they substitute expression for action. They speak instead of build. They react instead of decide. They confuse noise with agency. Constant stimulation keeps this illusion intact. A mind that never rests cannot reflect. A man that cannot reflect cannot recognize patterns. A mind that cannot recognize patterns believes everything is personal and nothing is structural. That belief traps people inside emotional reactions rather than strategic thought. Weakness is rewarded because it is predictable. Predictable people are easy to guide, easy to calm, easy to sell to. When someone collapses publicly, they receive attention and validation. When someone endures privately, they receive silence. Over time, people learn which behavior is reinforced. They learn that exposure is rewarded and restraint is ignored. This creates a culture where suffering must be displayed to be acknowledged. Stoicism threatens the culture because it removes the audience. A Stoic does not perform pain, he carries it. He does not narrate discipline, he practices it. That makes him invisible to systems that rely on constant feedback and emotional output. Silence becomes dangerous in such an environment. Silence does not signal weakness. It signals control. In conversation, the one who speaks least reveals least. The one who reveals least is harder to predict. The harder someone is to predict, the less leverage others have over them. Most people misunderstand silence. They interpret it as insecurity, withdrawal, or lack of confidence. In reality, silence is pressure. It forces others to fill the gap. It exposes impatience, insecurity, and the need for validation. The silent person observes while others reveal themselves. The Stoics understood this. Speech was not a reflex, it was a tool. Words spoken without necessity weaken the speaker, because they surrender information and emotional leverage. A person who must constantly explain themselves is already compromised. Self-mastery begins where self-improvement ends. Self-improvement focuses on accumulation, more habits, more routines, more strategies. Self-mastery focuses on subtraction, removing compulsive reaction, removing unnecessary desire, removing the need to be seen, praised, or understood. Most suffering does not come from lack. It comes from excessive wanting. Wanting approval, wanting comfort, wanting certainty. When desires are unexamined, they become handles others can grab. Every unmanaged desire is a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The disciplined individual is not disciplined because restraint is pleasurable. Discipline is rarely comfortable. It is chosen because the cost of indulgence is higher. Every avoided discomfort compounds into fragility. Every accepted discomfort compounds into resilience. Resilience is not loud. It does not advertise itself. It does not seek recognition. That is why it is often mistaken for indifference. In truth, it is containment, the ability to hold pressure without leaking emotion, explanation, or justification. Modern systems struggle to tolerate this trait at scale. A population capable of restraint cannot be driven by impulse. A population comfortable with silence cannot be baited into constant outrage. A population that fears dishonor more than discomfort cannot be managed through convenience and distraction. This is why strength is reframed as toxicity, why discipline is labeled obsession, why independence is portrayed as arrogance. These labels exist to discourage limitation. If self-mastery were normalized, manipulation would lose efficiency. Most people stay weak because weakness feels safe. Safe from responsibility, safe from solitude, safe from self-examination. Strength demands facing the self without distraction, without excuses, without an audience. The level of honesty is intolerable to most. Solitude exposes patterns that noise hides. It reveals how much of life is reaction rather than choice. Many avoid silence not because it is empty, but because it is revealing. In science, there is nowhere to hide from oneself. Most people fill their days with noise to avoid confronting their own lack of direction. Entertainment replaces intention. Distraction replaces decision. Over time, this avoidance becomes habitual. The mind loses the ability to sit with difficulty without escaping. This is where real self-mastery begins, not with productivity, not with optimization, but with the ability to remain present when discomfort appears, to resist the impulse to soothe immediately, to allow tension to exist long enough to teach something. Discomfort is information. When avoided, it repeats. When examined, it resolves. The Stoics understood this. Pain was not something to dramatize or suppress, but something to interrogate. What is this teaching? What attachment is being exposed? What expectation is being violated? Expectation is the silent source of most suffering. Expectation of fairness, expectation of ease, expectation of recognition. When reality does not comply, frustration appears. The disciplined mind reduces expectation and increases preparation. Preparation creates calm. Calm creates clarity. Clarity allows choice. This is the chain most people never complete. Instead, they live in reaction, reacting to news, reacting to opinions, reacting to emotions that are not examined but obeyed. Reaction feels alive, but it is not agency, it is movement without direction. The person who masters themselves slows this cycle. They insert space between stimulus and response. In that space, control lives. Not control over others, but control over the only thing that matters: behavior. Behavior repeated becomes character. Character repeated becomes destiny. This is not motivational language, it is psychological law. Most people outsource for this process. They let environment dictate behavior. Mood dictate action. Approval dictate direction. Over time, the self becomes fragmented. There is no core, only reactions. Self-mastery rebuilds that core through consistency, doing what is required regardless of mood, maintaining standards regardless of attention, acting according to principle even when no reward is visible. This is why self-mastery feels lonely at first. It removes external reinforcement. There are no immediate rewards, no applause, no reassurance. Only alignment. But alignment compounds. Slowly at first, then unmistakably. At some point, pressure that once caused collapse no longer moves you. Situations that once demanded explanation no longer deserve one. You stop negotiating with impulses. You stop arguing with distractions. Decisions become simpler, not because life is easier, but because you are clearer. Most people never reach this stage, not because it is impossible, but because it is uncomfortable and unglamorous. It offers no shortcuts and no performance. But those who do reach it no longer need to dominate others. They no longer seek control externally because control internally is sufficient. This is the quiet power most never see coming, and that is why most people stay weak. Most people never question why their attention is constantly under attack. They assume distraction is normal, that focus is rare, and that exhaustion is simply part of modern life. In reality, a distracted mind is a compliant mind. Attention determines direction. Direction determines outcome. Whoever controls attention controls behavior. This is why your focus is fragmented intentionally. Notifications, trends, outrage, urgency, novelty, none of these are accidental. They keep the mind externally oriented, reactive and impatient. A mind that cannot stay with a single thought long enough to examine it cannot challenge the structure it lives in. Stoicism teaches the opposite posture. withdraw attention inward, reduce inputs, strengthen perception. When attention is reclaimed, reality sharpens. Problems become smaller. Desires become negotiable. Fear becomes specific instead of vague. Vague fear is paralyzing. Specific fear is manageable. This distinction is critical. Most people live under a cloud of unease they cannot name. They feel behind, inadequate, exposed, uncertain. Because the threat is undefined, the response is avoidance. Avoidance becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. A self-mastered individual forces clarity. What exactly is the threat? What exactly is the cost? What exactly is required? This line of questioning collapses imaginary danger and exposes real risk. Real risk can be prepared for. Imaginary risk only consumes energy. Energy is the real currency, not time, not money. Energy determines consistency. Consistency determines results. When energy is scattered across unnecessary emotional reactions, little remains for deliberate action. This is why emotional regulation is power, not emotional suppression, but emotional literacy. The ability to feel without obeying, to observe without becoming it. Most people invert this relationship. Emotion commands, action follows, consequences accumulate. Stoicism reverses the order: perception first, judgment second, response third. This sequence restores agency. Without it, behavior is automatic, and automatic behavior is exploitable. Exploitation doesn't always come from an external oppressor. Often it comes from internal habits reinforced by culture. The habit of comparison, the habit of outrage, the habit of indulgence disguised as self-expression. Comparison erodes identity. When self-worth is measured against others, it becomes unstable. There will always be someone ahead, louder, richer, more admired. A person trapped in comparison never arrives, they only chase. The Stoic measures against self, against principle, against consistency. This internal metric cannot be manipulated. It does not fluctuate with opinion. It produces calm because it is stable. Outrage functions similarly. It feels righteous but consumes focus. It gives the illusion of moral action while achieving nothing. Outrage keeps people busy without making them effective. Systems encourage outrage because it exhausts energy without threatening structure. The disciplined mind chooses silence over reaction, not because nothing matters, but because not everything deserves attention. Attention is finite. Spend it poorly, and discipline collapses. Indulgence is the final lever. Comfort weakens resistance. When comfort becomes non-negotiable, discipline becomes impossible. Every avoided discomfort reinforces fragility. Every small voluntary hardship reinforces resilience. The Stoics practice this deliberately. Cold, hunger, simplicity, not as punishment but as training. They remove dependency on comfort so that circumstance could not control behavior. Modern life does the opposite. It removes friction. One-click gratification, endless entertainment, constant reassurance. These comforts feel humane, but they erode capacity. When difficulty inevitably appears, the untrained mind collapses. This collapse is then medicalized, externalized, excused. responsibility is removed. The individual is told the system will adapt for them. This message feels compassionate, but it quietly communicates something dangerous. You are not capable. Self-mastery rejects this entirely. It assumes capacity. It assumes resilience can be built. It assumes responsibility is empowering, not oppressive. Responsibility forces engagement with reality. It removes fantasy. It strips away excuses. It clarifies cause and effect. The clarity is uncomfortable, but it is liberating. Freedom is not the absence of constraint. It is the ability to choose one's constraints. Discipline is chosen constraint. Without it, constraint is imposed externally. This is why the disciplined individual appears rigid to others. In reality, they are flexible where it matters, and firm where it counts. They bend circumstance instead of being bent by it. Over time, this posture creates authority. Not loud authority, quiet authority. People sense it before they can explain it. Boundaries become implicit. Manipulation attempts fail quickly. This does not make life easy. It makes it simpler. Simplicity is not comfort, it is clarity. Fewer reactions, fewer negotiations, fewer internal conflicts. Most people live in constant internal debate. Should I? Shouldn't I? What if? What will they think? This mental noise drains energy. Discipline silences it by deciding in advance. Decide what you tolerate. Decide what you pursue. Decide what you ignore. Once decided, execution becomes mechanical. This is why the self-mastered individual seems calm under pressure. Pressure has already been accounted for. Emotion still arises, but it no longer dictates action. Eventually something shifts. You stop seeking permission. You stop explaining. You stop defending choices that align with your principles. Not because you are hostile, but because justification is no longer required. This is the point where influence reverses. Instead of being shaped by environment, you shape it. Not through force, but through consistency. Consistency is intimidating because it exposes inconsistency. Many will resist it. Some will resent it. A few will respect it. Respect is earned quietly. Most people never reach this stage because it requires sustained effort without immediate reward. It requires faith in process rather than outcome. It requires accepting discomfort without narrative. But those who do reach it no longer need validation. They no longer chase control. They embody it. And once that happens, weakness is no longer an option. If this bothered you, it was supposed to.